There is a version of Sunday's semifinal where the scoreboard tells only half the story. On paper, it looks like a clash between a four-time Grand Slam champion and a rising Filipina star who is still writing the biggest chapters of her career. But if you've followed this tournament closely, you already know the numbers don't explain what's really happening. One player is carrying the weight of experience, championship pedigree, and years spent dominating the biggest stages in tennis. The other is arriving with something far more dangerous: belief. The kind of belief that comes from proving, match after match, that victories once dismissed as impossible are becoming a habit. That's why I don't think this match should be viewed as another routine semifinal. I think it represents something much bigger. It's the collision between established greatness and fearless momentum. And unlike many previews you'll hear this week, I'm not convinced that rankings or trophy counts will decide what happens when these two step onto the court. The real battle begins long before either player hits a winner. It begins in the opening exchanges, when both are forced to answer one simple question: how quickly can you solve a puzzle you've never faced before? Because this isn't a rivalry, it's a first meeting. There are no previous matches to rely on, no emotional scars from past defeats, no confidence gained from earlier victories. Everything both players know has come from scouting reports, practice footage, and hours of studying tendency. That's very different from standing across the net and feeling an opponent's pace in real time. And that's exactly why the first few games may shape the entire afternoon. Eala has never experienced Naomi Osaka's serve under the pressure of live competition. Reading it on video and returning it in person are two completely different challenges. Likewise, Osaka has never dealt with Eala's ability to take the ball early, flatten out her backhand, and rush opponents before they're fully set. Those aren't details that can be perfectly prepared for in a practice room. They can only be understood once the match begins. Whoever adapts first gains an enormous advantage. In a best-of-3 contest, momentum develops quickly. One confident service hold can change body language. One early break can completely rewrite the emotional direction of the match. That's why the opening set matters far more than most people realize. It isn't simply about getting ahead on the scoreboard. It's about discovering which player feels comfortable first. Before looking ahead, though, we have to understand how Eala earned this opportunity. Her quarterfinal performance didn't simply produce another impressive result. It reinforced a pattern that has been quietly developing throughout the season. Earlier this year, many people described her biggest victories as isolated surprises, a talented young player enjoying a special week. But that explanation becomes harder to defend every time she repeats the same achievement against elite competition. Her victory over Elina Svitolina wasn't built on reckless shot-making or unsustainable risk. It was built on discipline. Instead of allowing long baseline exchanges where Svitolina usually thrives, Eala consistently disrupted the rhythm of rallies before they could fully develop. She stepped inside the court whenever opportunities appeared, struck the ball early, and forced Svitolina into uncomfortable defensive positions. Rather than reacting to her opponent's strengths, she imposed her own tempo from the very beginning. That's a sign of tactical maturity, not youthful luck. More importantly, she executed almost the same blueprint that worked during their previous meeting in Berlin. When a strategy succeeds once, critics can call it fortunate. When it succeeds again against the same world-class opponent, it becomes evidence of genuine growth. That may be the biggest lesson from Eala's run this week. She's no longer building confidence through isolated upsets. She's building consistency. Still, there's another side of the story that deserves equal attention. Every victory leaves a cost. By reaching this stage, Eala has asked a tremendous amount from both her body and her concentration. Her opening round battle demanded resilience after losing the first set. Instead of allowing frustration to take control, she gradually solved the match and finished strongly. The next challenge required an even greater emotional recovery. Facing the defending champion, she appeared on the verge of defeat before producing one of the tournament's most impressive comebacks, refusing to surrender despite the scoreboard working against her. Matches like that don't simply test technique, they test emotional endurance. Then came the quarterfinal against Svitolina, another physically demanding contest against one of the tour's smartest competitors. By the time Sunday's semifinal arrives, Eala will have played several intense battles in only a few days. That's important because North American hardcourts demand a different kind of movement than the grass season she recently completed. Every explosive change of direction places additional stress on the legs. Every extended rally gradually drains recovery time that simply doesn't exist during a busy tournament schedule. Fatigue doesn't always announce itself dramatically. Sometimes it appears as one slightly slower recovery step. One forehand struck a fraction later than usual. One defensive sprint that falls just short. Against an opponent like Naomi Osaka, those tiny differences can become enormous. And speaking of Osaka, her path to the semifinal has unfolded quite differently. While the scoreboard shows another successful week, the journey hasn't been completely straightforward. One match ended earlier than expected because of her opponent's retirement, reducing the physical demands placed on her body. Then came a far more revealing contest, one that exposed both her vulnerability and her champion's instinct. She dropped the opening set after struggling to find her timing. Returns arrived late. Ground strokes lacked their usual precision. Small errors began appearing in moments where fans normally expect certainty. For a brief period, she looked uncomfortable. But champions are defined less by the problems they face than by the adjustments they make. Instead of allowing frustration to grow, Osaka gradually corrected her footwork, cleaned up her ball striking, and began dictating rallies with increasing authority. The match changed because she found solutions before her opponent could fully capitalize. That recovery may end up being the most important clue heading into Sunday. Because if those same timing issues return against Eala, the Filipina possesses exactly the style capable of exposing them. And that's where this semi-final becomes truly fascinating. Because the biggest battle may not be Osaka's serve versus Eala's return. It may be whether Eala can deny Osaka the time she needs to become comfortable before the former world number one settles into her championship rhythm. The technical matchup is where this semi-final becomes far more intriguing than the rankings suggest. On paper, Naomi Osaka owns the bigger weapons. She has one of the most explosive first serves in women's tennis, and when her ground strokes are perfectly timed, very few players can absorb that level of power for an entire match. But tennis has never been played on paper. It is decided by rhythm, positioning, and timing. And that's exactly where Eala believes she can create problems. Osaka's forehand is devastating when she's allowed to step into the court with balanced footwork. Everything begins from her lower body. The rotation through her hips and shoulders creates effortless pace that can overwhelm almost any opponent. When she's striking from comfortable positions, the ball explodes through the court before defenders have time to react. But even the biggest weapons have conditions. If Osaka is forced to hit while moving backward, or if she's rushed before completing her preparation, the margin for error becomes much smaller. We saw brief glimpses of that earlier in the tournament. A few late contact points, a handful of forehands drifting beyond the baseline, tiny timing issues that wouldn't concern most players, but against an opponent willing to attack every opening, even small cracks can become significant. That's exactly where Eala's game enters the equation. She isn't trying to overpower Osaka. She's trying to prevent Osaka from ever becoming comfortable. One of Eala's greatest strengths is how early she takes the ball. Rather than allowing shots to rise into comfortable hitting zones, she often steps forward and redirects pace before opponents have fully recovered from their previous stroke. That style shortens reaction time and forces rush decisions. Against many players, it's simply an aggressive tactic. Against Osaka, it could become the foundation of the entire game plan. Every early backhand, every deep return, every flat cross-court exchange has one purpose: to keep the former world number one thinking instead of attacking. Of course, there is another side to this battle: the serve. And this may ultimately decide whether Eala has a realistic chance of reaching the final. When Osaka's first serve is landing consistently, it changes everything. The points become shorter. The pressure on return games increases. Opponents spend more time defending than creating opportunities. It's one of the reasons she collected 4 Grand Slam titles during the peak of her career. For Eala, the objective isn't necessarily to dominate Osaka's service games, it's to survive them. If she can consistently force second serves, extend rallies, and occasionally earn break opportunities, she'll gradually increase the pressure on Osaka's own confidence. She doesn't need to break every service game. She simply needs to convince Osaka that every service game will require real work. That mental pressure builds over time. And sometimes, that's more valuable than an immediate break of serve. On the opposite side of the net, Osaka faces a different challenge entirely. Returning against Eala requires patience. Unlike many power hitters, Eala doesn't always offer easy pace to redirect. Her flatter trajectories stay low through the court, making aggressive returns more difficult. Instead of gifting free power, she forces opponents to generate everything themselves. That subtle difference matters, because players who rely on rhythm often become uncomfortable when they can't predict the pace coming toward them. There's another tactical wrinkle that shouldn't be overlooked either. Throughout this tournament, Eala has shown increasing confidence moving forward whenever short balls appear inside the service line. She's not serving and volleying every point, nor is she abandoning baseline tennis. Instead, she's choosing calculated moments to finish rallies at the net before opponents can reset. Those approaches accomplish more than simply ending points. They change the geometry of the match. Suddenly, Osaka has to think about passing shots instead of constructing baseline exchanges. She has less time to establish the rhythm that normally allows her biggest weapons to flourish. Even if Eala uses this tactic only a handful of times each set, it forces constant adjustments. And against elite players, forcing adjustments is often half the battle. But here's the part almost everyone seems to overlook. This match isn't being played in perfect conditions. It's being played after an exhausting week. Eala's path has demanded significantly more physical and emotional energy. Match after match, she has been forced to solve different problems, fight through pressure moments, and spend longer periods on court. Every comeback required emotional investment. Every victory demanded concentration from the opening point until the final handshake. Those miles begin to accumulate. Not always in obvious ways. Sometimes fatigue appears in the seventh game instead of the first. Sometimes it reveals itself during a deciding set, when one extra sprint suddenly feels impossible. Against a player with Osaka's firepower, even losing half a step can completely change an exchange. Meanwhile, Osaka arrives with a different advantage. She has experienced nearly every pressure situation imaginable. Grand Slam final, championship points, packed stadiums, hostile crowds, career-defining moments. That experience doesn't guarantee victory, but it often provides calm when matches become chaotic. And that's why Sunday's semifinal feels so fascinating. One player carries momentum. The other carries experience. One has nothing to lose. The other understands exactly what's at stake. Beyond the semifinal itself, this match also represents something larger for both careers. For Eala, defeating a multiple-time Grand Slam champion on a North American hardcourt would be another statement that her rise isn't temporary. It would strengthen the growing belief that she belongs among the sport's established names, not simply its promising newcomers. For Naomi Osaka, another deep tournament run would continue confirming that her return to the highest level is gathering momentum at exactly the right time before the biggest events of the season. Both players are chasing more than just a place in the final. They're chasing belief. Now let's talk about what I believe ultimately decides this match. Forget the rankings. Forget the trophy cabinet. Forget the headlines. Watch the opening 4 games. If Eala holds confidently and creates early pressure on Osaka's serve, even without converting a breakpoint, the psychological balance immediately begins to shift. Osaka will know she hasn't been given the comfortable start every power player wants. But if Osaka lands a high percentage of first serves from the opening game and controls her early service holds with authority, the match could accelerate in her favor very quickly. Once she's playing freely, her confidence tends to grow with every winner. That's why those opening exchanges matter more than any statistic you'll read before the match begins. They'll reveal which player has solved the unknown first. As for my prediction, I think this becomes far closer than many people expect. I expect momentum to swing in both directions. I expect Eala's fearless shot-making to create difficult moments for Osaka, particularly if she succeeds in taking time away during the opening set. But over the course of a full match, Osaka's experience, serving power, and ability to adjust under pressure may provide just enough separation when it matters most. I see Osaka advancing in 3 competitive sets, but I wouldn't call an Eala victory a shock anymore. Not after everything she's accomplished this season. Because if there's one lesson Eala has taught the tennis world, it's this: the impossible stops looking impossible once you keep proving people wrong. And if she finds the answers before Naomi Osaka does on Sunday, we may be watching another defining chapter in one of tennis's fastest rising careers.